The investigation into the January 6th attack of the Capitol continues to widen. Federal prosecutors say they expect to charge at least 550 people in connection to the attack. That's up from an earlier estimate of 500. According to an NBC News tally of court cases, there has been a total of 490 charges so far, 464 people charged in federal court and 26 charges in Washington, D.C. Superior Court. More than 900 search warrants have been issued nationwide. Let's read from the piece by Atlantic staff writer Adam Serwer. It's entitled "The Capitol Rioters Won." And Adam writes in part, quote, "For the Trumpist base, defined by the sense that a country that belongs to them is slipping away, a future full of elections contested by a right-wing party and a slightly less right-wing party would be an ideal outcome. Trump's election was, among other things, a gesture of outrage from his supporters at having to share the country with those unlike them. Successfully restricting democracy so as to minimize the political power of rival constituencies would mean, at least as far as governing the country is concerned, that they would not have to. Most elected Republicans have repudiated the violence of the Capitol riot, but they share the belief of the rank and file that the rioters' hearts were in the right place." And Joe, that's the most unbelievably frustrating part of this. This was an attempted coup. This was and I will keep the emotion at a minimum here, but this was an attack on our democracy as it was in process. This was a terrorist act. It was as bad as anything else that we have seen in history that we look at as a dark, black moment in history. And yet their hearts were in the right place? Are you kidding me?
I mean, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And again, well, I think there are people who have shown us that they're anti-democratic. Certainly not just the rioters, but those who defend the rioters over and over again, the seditionists, the insurrectionists, the people that voted against the election, people who voted not to certify those votes. And Jonathan Lemire, the rank-and-file Republican Party. And, you know, it was always convenient for us to blame Donald Trump and some hacks in Congress for what was happening from 2017 to 2020. Harder to do that when you have anybody that speaks out against the conspiracy theories getting censored. Getting sanctioned by the Republican Party. You have, of course, Liz Cheney, who is kicked out of leadership for telling the truth about what happened on January the 6th. They literally, a modern American political party kicks somebody out of leadership for condemning an insurrection against the United States government. Let me just say that again. I'm going to slow that one down for a second. A political party in America this year in 2021 kicked out a member of leadership for telling the truth about an insurrection against the United States of America. And so that's where they are. You have people like Ben Sasse, who spoke out against it, who got sanctioned and basically mocked the Nebraska Republicans who were sanctioning. And you can go through it. These people that actually did what they were supposed to do on Election Day, on a county level, removed from their jobs. You had this weekend Brian Kemp, the Trumpiest of all Trump governors this side of Ron DeSantis, booed. Secretary of State, who was also a Trump supporter, again, he was sanctioned by the state party, all because they would not overturn the election results. So, yes, this is, again, we can't be shocked every day by it. We have to recognize there are three parties in America: a Republican Party, a Democratic Party, and an illiberal, anti-democratic insurrectionist party. And that's just where we are as a country. The question is, what do we do about it now?
Joe, there are exceptions. You mentioned some of them. Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney's another who got booed at his state convention because he didn't support the decertification of the Joe Biden's Electoral College victory. But this is where the Republican Party is right now. And yes, we can call it portion of it the Trumpist Party, but they put the R next to their name. And this is where the party is right now, and it's the rank and file. And we see the polling. Think of any time after time. A majority of voters who identify themselves as Republicans do not think Joe Biden was legally elected. They do not believe he has a legitimate claim on power. It is because of the doubts sowed by former President Trump, the way it was amplified in the conservative media, the way that so many Republicans simply did his bidding in perpetuating and propagating these lies. Now we have Trump stepping out onto the public stage again with an appearance last weekend, rallies to come. So, Casey, I wanted to ask you about two things. First, if you could provide an update on whatever House Speaker Pelosi might be doing to look into January 6th, since we know the Senate killed the official commission. But secondly, the Biden administration has really prided themselves on being results-oriented. We see the COVID relief bill. We see the vaccine program be a wild success. But right now, it seems like there's just roadblock after roadblock after roadblock to all of these pieces of their agenda. You know as well as I do how nervous Democrats get, how easily anxious they get. That's happening already, is my sense, that they fear they're not going to have much more to show for this the next year and a half, and they could suffer consequences in 2022. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I do think, to your point about Democrats being nervous about these things, that, yes, there is some nail-biting going on. I think it's partly because they know that these first 2 years of the Biden administration, it could be their only shot. History would say that they are likely to lose seats in the House. Potentially they could lose seats in the Senate, though I think they're more confident that they'll continue to hang on to the Senate. But without that, things just get so much more difficult. So that's part of why what Joe Manchin sort of definitively did over the weekend. I mean, we've known this was where he stood, but he really drew a line in the sand. And that presents some serious challenges for Democrats as they try to figure out how to move this agenda forward. On January 6th, I think Democrats are still weighing their options there. There seems to be some support for a select committee to investigate it, a little bit like the select committee on Benghazi. But there are potentially some risks there because, of course, we all know how political that was and what the view was, among people across the country. So, I do think there's a reluctance to politicize what happened on January 6th. But, the reality is, I think at this point, the ship has sailed, as we have been pointing out and talking through. I mean, with the commission's demise and the Republican decision that they have to essentially look the other way, there's not much else to be done here. And, one question I do have, based on the conversation we've been having this morning, too, about the respective bases of the parties, and to pick up on Dave Weigel's earlier point, I do think it's possible that in some ways the focus on Trump and the Republican Party embrace of Trump may just be actually activating the Democratic base more than it's activating those Republican, or at least temporarily Republican voters who came out because they wanted to vote for Donald Trump.